Don't get in the car. Maid's daughter screams at CEO. His jaw drops at the shocking truth. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It all began on a quiet afternoon, in a mansion perched high above the city. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow across the sprawling estate. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, yet calm, a striking contrast to what was about to unfold. At the heart of the mansion, a powerful CEO, Daniel Blackwood, was preparing for a business meeting. He was tall, sharply dressed in an expensive suit, and surrounded by the luxurious aura that came with his success. For years, he had built an empire. Nothing could stand in his way, or so he thought. Outside, the staff went about their duties, moving with practiced silence. Among them was Maria, a maid who had worked for the Blackwood family for over a decade. She was used to being invisible, blending into the background as she quietly tended to the home's daily needs. Her daughter, Sophie, was a 10-year-old girl who, like her mother, was expected to stay out of sight. Sophie often spent her days quietly reading in corners, unseen by the family and their guests. But today, everything was different. Sophie had overheard something unusual, a conversation that seemed far too intense for someone of her age to comprehend, yet it stuck in her mind. As her mother pushed the cart down the long hallway, Sophie paused to listen. She heard snippets of a plan, words that didn't sit right with her. The car, don't let her in. It's dangerous. Sophie's heart raced as she tried to make sense of what she had heard. What was going on? She had no idea, but something told her that the car Daniel Blackwood was about to get into was not safe. It wasn't just a passing thought. It was a gut feeling, something that tugged at her instincts. And that was when she made up her mind. As Daniel stepped outside, ready to leave for his meeting, Sophie ran towards the driveway. She wasn't supposed to be here, wasn't supposed to be seen, but the thought of the car, the danger, it was too much. She had to stop him. Sophie screamed as loud as she could, "Don't get in the car." Her voice echoed through the driveway, a small voice in a world of power and wealth. Daniel froze, his hand on the door handle, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. Sophie stood there, trembling, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. Daniel didn't know what to make of it. Who was this child to stop him? A maid's daughter, a mere servant's kid, warning him like she had any authority. The confusion on his face was evident. But Sophie wasn't backing down. She took a deep breath, summoning all the courage she could find, and shouted again, "Don't get in the car." Daniel stared at her, unable to comprehend what was happening. But just as he was about to dismiss her, something clicked. He noticed the small details Sophie had observed, the things that no one else had caught. The car, his prized vehicle, was not as it seemed. And that's when Sophie's words began to sink in. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The air shifted, the luxury around them suddenly felt like a facade, and Sophie, the invisible child, had just saved a powerful man from an impending disaster. As Daniel Blackwood's jaw dropped in shock, he realized that sometimes, the people you least expect can see the truth clearer than anyone else. The moment Daniel Blackwood realized something was off with his car, he took a step back, his hand still hovering over the door handle. Sophie stood in front of him, her small frame trembling slightly, but her eyes were clear, filled with an unwavering certainty. The wealthy CEO, accustomed to power and control, now found himself at a crossroads. For the first time in years, he was unsure. He had always trusted his instincts, his vast network of advisors, and his wealth. But this child, the daughter of his maid, had caught him off guard. Sophie's warning, though seemingly insignificant, carried a weight that Daniel couldn't ignore. "What do you mean, don't get in the car?" he asked, his voice steady, but with an edge of frustration. Sophie swallowed, her heart racing, but she didn't falter. "There's something wrong with it, Mr. Blackwood. I overheard something." Her voice shook slightly, but she stood her ground. Daniel looked around, his mind processing the situation. The driveway was quiet, the car gleaming under the setting sun, its polished surface reflecting the world around it. It looked pristine, perfect, just as his life had always seemed. But Sophie's words lingered in the air, and the more he thought about it, the more uneasy he felt. I don't understand. Why would you be involved in something like this? Daniel muttered under his breath. Sophie hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward, her small hand reaching out to point at the car. There's a tracker hidden inside. I don't know who put it there, but I heard them talk about it. They said you were the target. Someone's planning to track your movements. They might be after you, Mr. Blackwood. Sophie's words hit Daniel like a freight train. His first instinct was to laugh it off, dismiss it as the ramblings of a child. But the fear in Sophie's eyes was too real, too raw. She wasn't just playing make-believe. Sophie wasn't wrong. Slowly, Daniel took a deep breath and stepped back from the car. His mind raced, piecing together fragments of information he had ignored for months. Business rivals, enemies, threats that had been on the periphery of his life, but never fully acknowledged. He had been too busy, too wrapped up in his world of corporate success, to pay attention to the subtle signs of danger creeping closer. You're serious, Daniel finally said, his voice low. Sophie nodded. Yes, Mr. Blackwood. I heard them say they were going to strike tonight. I couldn't let you get in the car without warning you. For a moment, there was a heavy silence. Daniel felt a wave of gratitude wash over him, quickly followed by a deep sense of shame. How many times had he ignored the people around him, dismissed them as insignificant? And yet, it was this young girl, the maid's daughter, who had saved him. He turned towards Sophie, his expression softening. Thank you, he said quietly. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't said anything. Sophie looked up at him, her eyes still wide, but no longer filled with fear. Instead, there was a quiet pride in them. I just wanted to help, she said, her voice steady now. Daniel stood there for a moment longer, his mind still processing the shock of it all. The car, the plot, the fact that Sophie had noticed something he hadn't. He glanced back at the mansion, his life of luxury, power, and wealth. He had everything, or so he thought. But in that moment, it was clear that none of it meant anything without people like Sophie. People who cared enough to speak up, to make a difference. Sophie, Daniel began, his voice stronger now. I think it's time I start paying attention to the things I've been ignoring. And I want to make sure you and your mother never have to feel invisible again. The words came out more easily than he expected. Sophie looked up at him, surprised, but there was a hint of hope in her eyes. It was a small promise, but one that carried a weight of sincerity. As the sun set behind them, Daniel Blackwood realized that the true measure of his success wasn't in the power he held or the empire he had built. It was in the people who had the courage to speak the truth, no matter how small they seemed. After the intense moment in the driveway, Daniel Blackwood stood still, processing the reality that this young girl, Sophie, had just saved his life. He had heard rumors about his rivals, whispers of plots that could topple his empire, but he had brushed them aside, believing they were all just tactics to distract him. Now, standing in front of Sophie, he realized how wrong he had been. Sophie had seen something no one else had. As they both stood there in the fading light of the evening, Daniel could not help but feel a wave of guilt wash over him. For so long, he had built his empire by dismissing the voices of those beneath him, people like Sophie and her mother. His wealth, his power, it all seemed so insignificant now. It was not the flashy cars or the luxurious mansions that made life meaningful. It was the people who cared enough to speak out, to make a difference when no one else would. Daniel looked down at Sophie, her small frame still trembling slightly from the rush of emotions. She was just a child, but she had a clarity of purpose that he hadn't seen in most adults. You saved me, Daniel said quietly, his voice tinged with both awe and gratitude. Sophie looked up at him, her blue eyes wide but now filled with a quiet determination. I just did what was right, she replied softly. You were in danger, and I couldn't let you walk into it. Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. He had always believed that the world operated on power, status, and control. But here was this little girl, who had nothing in terms of wealth or status, yet she held more courage and integrity than most people he knew. The realization hit him hard. He had taken everything for granted. He had never bothered to truly see the people around him, to understand the lives of those who worked for him. Sophie was more than just a maid's daughter. She was someone who had noticed the details, who had trusted her instincts, and who had the courage to speak up when it mattered most. Sophie's warning had saved him, but it also made him see the cracks in his own life. For the first time in a long time, he began to question everything he had built. He needed to change. "Sophie," Daniel began, his voice steady now, "you're not just a maid's daughter. You're someone who has more integrity than most people I know. I owe you more than just thanks. I promise you, I will make sure your life, and your mother's life, are never the same again." Sophie blinked, surprised by the sincerity in his words. She had never expected anything from him, not beyond a simple acknowledgement of her presence. But hearing him say that, she felt a warmth in her chest that she had never felt before. For the first time, someone was truly seeing her, truly understanding her worth. Daniel took a deep breath, a newfound resolve filling him. "I've been so wrapped up in my own world, in my own success, that I failed to see what really mattered. But that changes today. You and your mother deserve more than what you've been given. I'll make sure of it." As Sophie listened to him, she felt a flicker of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, her life could be different. She had never asked for anything from him, but the promise in his words made her believe that change was possible. As the sun set behind them, casting long shadows across the driveway, Sophie and Daniel stood there, a silent understanding passing between them. It was the beginning of something new, something neither of them had expected, but something that was long overdue. Daniel Blackwood knew that he could never go back to the life he had before, not after seeing what he had ignored for so long. He had been given a second chance, not by his wealth or power, but by a young girl who dared to speak the truth when everyone else was too blind to see it. The next few days passed in a blur for Daniel Blackwood. After the shocking realization in the driveway, his mind was racing, trying to process everything that had happened. He couldn't stop thinking about Sophie, the maid's daughter, who had saved his life. The more he thought about it, the more he understood how much he had overlooked. Sophie had seen through the facade of wealth and power that surrounded him, while he had been blind to the true value of the people in his life. He had spent years chasing after success, never stopping to look at the faces of those who had helped him build his empire. His entire perspective was changing, but he didn't know where to start. Sophie had reminded him of something he had long forgotten: the importance of people. A few days after the incident, Daniel found himself walking through the halls of his mansion, reflecting on the conversation he'd had with Sophie. He was on his way to meet with his team when he stopped in front of the room where Sophie usually sat, doing her homework or reading quietly. This time, he knocked softly before opening the door. Sophie looked up in surprise. "Mr. Blackwood?" she asked, standing up quickly, her expression one of nervousness. "Is everything all right?" Daniel smiled warmly, his usual sharp demeanor softened by the change he was beginning to embrace. "I just wanted to thank you again, Sophie," he said, stepping into the room. "What you did for me, it's something I can never repay, but I'm going to try." Sophie blinked, clearly taken aback. "I didn't do it for anything in return, Mr. Blackwood," she said softly. "I just wanted to help." Daniel's heart swelled with gratitude. He realized now that Sophie's humility and honesty were qualities he had never truly valued before. "I know," he said, "but I want you to know that I appreciate it more than words can say. You've opened my eyes to what really matters, and I can't keep living the way I've been." Sophie gave him a small, unsure smile. "I don't really understand, Mr. Blackwood. You have everything. Why would you want to change?" Daniel paused, his expression becoming serious. "Because having everything means nothing if you're not truly living, Sophie. I've spent so many years building this empire, but I never stopped to see the people around me, the people who make it all possible. You taught me that. I've been blind to what really matters: kindness, respect, and integrity." Sophie looked down at the floor, unsure of how to respond. Daniel continued, his voice steady but filled with determination. "I want to make sure you and your mother never feel invisible again. I'm going to take steps to change things in my company and in my life. No more turning a blind eye to the people who work hard every day, who do the real work that keeps everything running." Sophie looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise. "But how?" Daniel smiled. "Starting with you. I'm going to make sure you have every opportunity to succeed. No more just being the maid's daughter. You're someone important, and you deserve the same chances as anyone else." Sophie was speechless. She had never imagined someone like Daniel Blackwood would ever think of her that way. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, truly seen. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel nodded, his resolve strengthening. You don't have to thank me. This is the beginning of something better. For both of us. As Daniel walked out of the room, he felt a sense of purpose that had been missing for so long. For years, he had been focused solely on building his empire. But now, he understood that true wealth wasn't in his bank account or the buildings he owned. It was in the people he had overlooked, the people who truly mattered. He had a long road ahead of him, but with Sophie's help, he knew he could change the course of his life and the lives of others who had been overlooked for too long. Days passed since Daniel Blackwood made his promise to Sophie, and the transformation in his life had begun. His company, which had once been his singular focus, now seemed like just one part of a much larger picture. Daniel's days were no longer just filled with board meetings and financial reports. He found himself increasingly involved with the lives of the people who had once been nothing more than names on a payroll. Sophie's actions had sparked something within him, something he could no longer ignore. As he sat in his office late one evening, Daniel reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. The business world was still competitive, ruthless, but for the first time, he wasn't just looking for profit. He was looking for meaning. His relationship with Sophie and her mother, Maria, was becoming more than just one of employer and employee. They were, in many ways, teaching him what he had failed to learn in all his years of wealth and power. But there was more to be done. The next morning, Daniel called his assistant. "I need a meeting with the senior management team today," he said, his tone clear and decisive. He wasn't just going to change his perspective. He was going to change the company, starting from the top. The senior management team arrived promptly, and the room was filled with familiar faces. People who had worked for Daniel for years, some of them as long as he had owned the company. They knew him as the driven CEO, the man who demanded perfection, who never tolerated failure. Today, they would see a different side of him. As everyone took their seats, Daniel stood and addressed the group. "I've been blind to something important for a long time," he began, his voice steady but carrying the weight of the changes he intended to make. "I've focused so much on the bottom line, on profits, on expanding our empire, that I've failed to see the people who make all of this possible." He paused, looking around the room, his eyes meeting the gaze of every person in the room. "That changes now. We are going to start prioritizing people. The employees who work hard every day to ensure our success. The ones who, like Sophie and Maria, go unnoticed but are the backbone of this company. We will not leave anyone behind." There was a moment of stunned silence in the room. Daniel could see the shock on their faces, but there was something else in their eyes too. Curiosity, maybe even hope. "From now on," he continued, "I want each of you to look at our workforce differently. Look at them as individuals, as people with dreams, with families, with lives outside of work. We will invest in their futures just as we invest in our business. This is no longer just about numbers on a page. It's about the people who make those numbers possible." One of the senior managers, a longtime executive named Richard, spoke up, his voice skeptical. "And what exactly do you expect us to do with this new direction, Daniel? You've always been about results. What do we do if we put people before profits?" Daniel met Richard's gaze, his expression firm. "We'll do both. We will focus on our employees, and in turn, we will see greater results than we've ever had. When people feel valued, they perform better. They'll give their best. That's the kind of company we're going to build." The room was quiet for a long moment. No one dared speak. Finally, Richard nodded slowly, though his expression remained guarded. The meeting ended with a clear sense of direction, but it was clear that this was just the beginning. As Daniel left the room, he felt a sense of accomplishment that he hadn't felt in years. He knew there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. That evening, Daniel sat down with Sophie and Maria at their small apartment. It was modest, but it felt like home. "I've started the process," Daniel told them, his voice soft but full of determination. "I'm going to make sure that everyone, no matter who they are, has the opportunity to succeed. And I'm starting with you too." Sophie looked up at him, her eyes filled with disbelief and gratitude. "You don't have to do that for us, Mr. Blackwood," Maria added, her voice filled with emotion. "We're just happy you're safe." Daniel smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that money could never buy. "I'm doing this because of you," he said. "You've opened my eyes to what really matters. And I'm going to make sure your lives are better, just as you made mine better." It was a simple promise, but one that carried the weight of true change. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but Daniel Blackwood was ready. He was no longer just a man with power and wealth. He was someone who understood the importance of people, of community, and of making sure that every individual had a chance to thrive. And that was a legacy worth building. The changes Daniel Blackwood had promised were beginning to take root, but it wasn't an easy journey. As the days turned into weeks, the atmosphere at the company began to shift. There were murmurs among the staff, a mixture of confusion and curiosity. No one was sure if Daniel's new approach would work. Some executives were skeptical, still believing that profits came first and people came second. But Daniel knew that real change would take time, and he was prepared for the challenge. One morning, as Daniel walked through the company's main office, he noticed a new energy in the air. Employees were talking more, laughing even, and the work environment felt less tense. It was a subtle change, but it was there. Sophie's influence on him had triggered a deeper understanding, not just about what was wrong, but about what could be right. His actions were beginning to have a ripple effect. People were starting to feel valued, and that made all the difference. In the weeks that followed, Daniel continued to work closely with his team, encouraging them to implement his new vision. They began to hold regular meetings with employees, not just the executives, but those who had previously been unseen, the janitors, the cooks, the security staff. For the first time in the company's history, every voice was being heard. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. During a quarterly review, Daniel found himself at odds with some of his most trusted senior managers. Richard, the senior vice president, who had been with Daniel for years, stood up during the meeting, his face flushed with frustration. "Daniel, I understand your desire to make things more inclusive, but this isn't the way to run a company. We've always prioritized results. We can't sacrifice performance for sentiment," Richard said, his voice loud and unwavering. Daniel took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the room's eyes on him. It was a test, one that would define whether he truly believed in the changes he was advocating for. He met Richard's gaze, his expression calm but firm. "I'm not asking for sentiment. I'm asking for respect. I'm asking for the recognition of the hard work that makes this company what it is. People are not just cogs in a machine, Richard. They're the heart of it. And if we want to be successful, we need to treat them that way." Richard scoffed, shaking his head. "Respect doesn't pay the bills, Daniel." Daniel stood up, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "Respect pays for everything. When people feel respected, they give their best. They are loyal. And loyalty, in the long run, is what keeps a company strong." There was silence in the room, and for a moment, Daniel wondered if he had lost them. But then, to his surprise, another voice spoke up. It was Sophie's. She had been invited to attend the meeting that day, as part of the new initiative to give employees a voice. She had been quiet up until then, sitting at the back of the room. But now, she stood up, her small figure commanding attention. "Mr. Blackwood is right," Sophie said, her voice clear and unwavering. "When you respect people, they'll do anything for you. I know, because my mom and I have worked for you for years, and we've always given our best. But when we were just invisible, we didn't feel like we mattered." The room was stunned into silence. Sophie's words were simple, but they cut through the tension in the room like a knife. Daniel looked over at her, a proud smile spreading across his face. "Thank you, Sophie," he said softly. The senior managers looked around at each other, clearly moved by Sophie's courage. The conversation shifted, and soon, the team was discussing ways to make the new initiatives work. They began brainstorming ways to improve employee engagement, ways to recognize the contributions of everyone, regardless of their position. By the end of the meeting, a new direction had been set. The change wasn't going to be easy, but it was happening. As Daniel walked out of the meeting, he felt a sense of pride, not just in his company, but in the people who had shown him the way. Sophie had been right all along. It wasn't just about business. It was about the people who made it all happen. He was no longer just a CEO of a corporation. He was now a leader of a community, one that valued every person and understood the true meaning of respect. And for the first time in his career, Daniel Blackwood felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. As weeks passed, Daniel Blackwood began to see the fruits of his efforts. The changes he had promised Sophie and the company were beginning to take shape, but it wasn't always easy. The corporate world was used to the harsh, profit-driven mentality that Daniel had embraced for so long. and many of his senior executives were still reluctant to embrace his vision of putting people first. However, with each passing day, the small victories were adding up. Employees were more engaged, morale was higher, and the company was slowly transforming into something more than just a profit machine. Daniel felt a sense of pride as he walked through the office one morning, hearing laughter and casual conversations in the halls. It wasn't a perfect environment yet, but it was a step in the right direction. Sophie, too, seemed to notice the changes. She was spending more time with her mother, Maria, who had recently been promoted within the company. It was a small victory, but one that meant the world to them both. Sophie had always known her mother's worth, but now, Daniel had made sure everyone else could see it too. One day, as Daniel was finishing up a meeting with a potential investor, he received a call from Sophie. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice urgent. "I need to talk to you. It's important." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. Sophie rarely called him directly. He quickly excused himself from the meeting and returned the call. "Sophie, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "Are you okay?" Sophie's voice wavered slightly. "It's about the company, Mr. Blackwood. Some of the people in the lower departments, they're still not getting the support they need. They're still feeling invisible, even though you said things were going to change." Daniel's heart sank. Despite all the progress, it seemed there was still work to be done. "I'm sorry, Sophie," he said, his tone filled with sincerity. "I thought we were making progress, but I see now that we need to do more. I'll take care of it. Thank you for letting me know." As soon as the call ended, Daniel sprang into action. He immediately scheduled a meeting with his team to discuss the issues that Sophie had raised. When they gathered in the conference room, Daniel made it clear that no one would be left behind. "We've made progress, yes," he began, "but we're still missing the mark. Some of our employees are still feeling unheard. We've promised to change, and we will. I need every one of you to commit to making that happen." The meeting was tense, but Daniel's words had an impact. The team was no longer just talking about change, they were ready to implement it. Over the next few weeks, the company implemented new initiatives designed to give every employee a voice. They created a system for anonymous feedback, allowing people in every department to share their concerns without fear of retaliation. They also began holding regular town hall meetings where employees could speak directly to the executives and the CEO. Slowly, the culture started to shift. It wasn't easy, and there were setbacks along the way, but Daniel's determination never wavered. He knew that the true test of leadership wasn't how much power he could wield, but how well he could empower others. One evening, after a particularly productive town hall meeting, Daniel sat down with Sophie and Maria. They were both quiet, but Daniel could tell they were proud of the changes that had been made. "Thank you, Sophie," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "You were right to speak up. You've made this company better, and I will never forget that." Sophie smiled, but her eyes were serious. "I didn't do it for thanks, Mr. Blackwood. I just wanted to make sure everyone was treated fairly. Everyone deserves to be seen." Daniel nodded, understanding the truth in her words. He had spent too long chasing power and wealth, but now, he was beginning to understand what it really meant to be a leader. It wasn't about what he had, it was about what he could give. As the sun set behind the city skyline, Daniel felt a sense of peace wash over him. He knew there was still work to be done, but for the first time in a long time, he felt confident that he was on the right path. The changes he had made in the company were just the beginning. His journey was far from over, but he was no longer alone. With Sophie and Maria by his side, and a company now focused on its people, Daniel Blackwood was ready for whatever came next. As the weeks passed, Daniel Blackwood continued to push for the changes he had promised, but the road ahead was far from easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when he questioned whether he was making the right choices. The old corporate mindset, the one focused solely on profits and bottom lines, still clung to some of the senior management team, and they didn't always understand why Daniel was prioritizing people over numbers. Yet, Daniel remained steadfast. He knew that the true strength of a company wasn't in how much money it made, but in the people who built it. His relationship with Sophie and Maria had shown him that. Slowly but surely, Daniel began to see the seeds of change take root. Employees at every level were more engaged, more open, and more willing to contribute to the company's success. They felt heard, respected, and valued. It wasn't a quick fix, but it was progress. One day, After a particularly tough meeting with some of the more resistant members of his executive team, Daniel found himself walking through the company's headquarters, lost in thought. As he passed through the hallways, he saw people working together in a way he had never seen before. There was a palpable sense of camaraderie, of shared purpose. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. Sophie had been right. When people felt like they mattered, they gave their best. As he passed by one of the offices, Daniel saw a familiar face, Richard, the senior vice president who had initially opposed his changes. Richard was standing at a desk, deep in conversation with one of the younger employees. Normally, Richard would have been in his office, handling high-level matters, but today he was listening. Really listening. It was a small moment, but it spoke volumes. Daniel smiled to himself. He was making a difference. Later that week, Daniel invited Sophie and Maria to his office. He had a surprise for them. "I've been thinking about everything you've done for this company, Sophie," Daniel began. "And I want to make sure that you have every opportunity to succeed. You deserve more than just being seen. You deserve a place at the table." Sophie's eyes widened, and Maria looked at Daniel in disbelief. "What do you mean?" Maria asked, her voice filled with surprise. Daniel's smile was warm and full of pride. "I'm offering you a position in the company. You've shown more leadership, more integrity, than some of the people I've worked with for years. I want you to have the chance to grow, to help shape this company." Sophie was speechless. She had never imagined this kind of opportunity for herself. "But I'm just a maid's daughter," Sophie said softly, as if the idea of being part of the company's leadership was too far-fetched. Daniel leaned forward, his gaze steady. "You are so much more than that. You've shown me that leadership is about listening, about understanding the people who make everything possible. You've already helped transform this company in ways I never could have on my own. I believe in you, Sophie." Maria, her eyes filled with emotion, placed her hand on Sophie's shoulder. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," she whispered. Sophie's heart swelled with gratitude and disbelief. She had always felt like she didn't belong in the world of business, but now, Daniel was offering her a place. A real place. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Daniel replied. "Just show up, just be yourself. That's all I'm asking." The next few months were a whirlwind of new challenges and opportunities. Sophie took on her new role with a level of maturity that impressed even the most seasoned executives. She worked closely with Daniel and the leadership team, helping to implement the changes they had discussed. Her unique perspective, shaped by her experiences as an outsider, brought fresh ideas and innovative solutions to the table. Slowly, the company continued to evolve, becoming more inclusive, more connected, and more successful. But for Daniel, the most rewarding part of the journey wasn't the profits or the accolades. It was watching Sophie grow into the leader he knew she could be. She had proven to him, and to everyone, that leadership wasn't about titles or status. It was about character, vision, and the willingness to stand up for what was right. As he stood in his office one evening, looking out over the city that he had built, Daniel felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had built an empire, yes, but he had also built something much more important. A company that valued its people, that listened to its employees, and that empowered the next generation of leaders, like Sophie. He knew there was still work to be done, but for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt at peace. The future was brighter, not because of the wealth or power he had, but because of the people he had chosen to surround himself with. As time passed, the changes at Daniel Blackwood's company became more than just a shift in business practices. It became a transformation in culture, one that Daniel could hardly have imagined when he first began his journey toward change. Sophie had not only proven herself in the business world, but she had become a symbol of everything he had once overlooked: the strength of individuals, the power of respect, and the incredible value of inclusivity. Daniel had always been a man of action, but it wasn't until Sophie's courage opened his eyes that he understood the true meaning of leadership. He had learned that a company could not thrive on profits alone. It thrived when its people felt seen, heard, and appreciated. Under his leadership, the company was thriving, but more importantly, the employees were thriving too. They were more invested, more motivated, and more loyal than ever before. Sophie had helped foster that shift, and now, she had become a cornerstone of that success. The day came when Daniel stood before his entire company, addressing them for the first time as a group since the transformation had begun. It was not a speech about profits or market share, but about the values they had all agreed to embrace. This company is more than just a place of work, Daniel began, his voice steady but full of conviction. It's a community, and each and every one of you is an integral part of that community. Together, we have built something powerful, something that isn't just measured in dollars and cents, but in the trust we have in each other. Sophie stood beside him, her role in the company no longer just symbolic. She was an equal now, a leader in her own right. Her journey from being a quiet observer to a driving force within the company was nothing short of remarkable, and she had earned her place at the table. Daniel's gaze shifted to her, and a proud smile tugged at his lips. "I want to take a moment to thank Sophie," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "She taught me that real leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about listening, understanding, and giving people the chance to shine. She's one of the reasons this company is now the best it's ever been." The room erupted in applause. Sophie, her face glowing with both pride and humility, felt a sense of accomplishment she had never thought possible. She had come so far from the scared little girl who had once been invisible in the world of the wealthy. Now, she was a leader, someone who had been seen, truly seen, and valued for who she was. As the applause died down, Daniel looked out at the sea of faces in front of him. They were his team, his family now, and the pride he felt for them was overwhelming. He had been given a second chance to do things right, and he was determined to continue on this path, making sure every person in his company had the opportunity to succeed. He realized, standing there, that success wasn't just about how much money he made or the legacy he left behind. It was about how he treated people, how he empowered them, and how he helped them realize their full potential. Sophie had changed his life, but in doing so, she had also changed the lives of everyone in that room. As the meeting ended and the employees filtered out, Daniel remained standing, his thoughts drifting back to the driveway that had started it all. He could still hear Sophie's voice, clear and firm, shouting, "Don't get in the car." It had been a simple warning, but it had led to everything that followed. Daniel had learned that the loudest voices didn't always come from the most powerful people. Sometimes, the smallest voices carried the most truth. He knew that this journey was far from over, but for the first time, he felt ready for whatever came next. He wasn't just a CEO anymore. He was a leader, one who listened, one who cared, and one who would continue to make the world around him a better place, starting with the people closest to him. And as Sophie and Maria walked beside him, both now standing proudly at his side, Daniel knew that the future had never been brighter. In this captivating tale of transformation and growth, we explore the inspiring journey of a man who went from being a typical billionaire obsessed with power to someone who truly understood the value of people. This millionaire story unfolds through the eyes of a young girl, Sophie, the daughter of a maid, whose actions changed everything for the wealthy CEO, Daniel Blackwood. What starts as a seemingly simple warning from Sophie leads to a series of life-altering events, highlighting the powerful message that true leadership is about respect, understanding, and empowerment. Through a series of trials and tribulations, Daniel learns that his greatest asset isn't his wealth or his empire, but the people who work hard behind the scenes. Sophie's courage sparks a change in Daniel's perspective, and he begins to see the importance of valuing every individual, regardless of their position. This millionaire story not only showcases the transformation of a man, but also the remarkable rise of a young girl who becomes a leader in her own right. As Daniel's company shifts toward a more inclusive and people-centered approach, he realizes that real success is not measured by profits alone, but by the positive impact made on the lives of others. Throughout this journey, we are reminded of the power of small voices and the incredible changes that can come from seeing people for who they truly are. From humble beginnings to inspiring leadership, this millionaire story captures the essence of what it means to create a legacy that goes beyond wealth, and instead, focuses on creating a supportive and thriving community. Sophie's story is proof that even the most unexpected individuals can make the biggest impact, and her journey to becoming a key figure in the company is one for the books. Through her, Daniel learns that millionaires are not just defined by their riches, but by their ability to lift others up and create a culture of respect and opportunity. In this touching conclusion to a remarkable journey, Daniel, Sophie, and their team begin to truly understand the heart of success and how the richest rewards come from the connections we build and the people we empower. This millionaire story will inspire anyone who believes in the power of change, leadership, and the importance of seeing value in everyone.